Welcome back to our three-part series all about Stanley Kubrick's cancelled Napoleon film. I'm joined again by my co-host, Eden Porter.
Thank you very much for having me, Cambo.
Last week, we covered the pre-production of this movie, what Kubrick was thinking.
Production notes for Napoleon, November 22nd, 1968.
The insane amount of research he did.
Kubrick got it to a point where he had a filing cabinet full of cards, and on these cards were every day Napoleon's life.
The cast he was after.
He had me read something from a play and put it on tape. Make sure I spoke regular English, you know.
The pre-production notes he meticulously went through.
The daily cost of a costume extra in England is $19.20, $14.28 in Italy, $24 in France, $24.30.
Everything that led up to a complete screenplay. We even learnt my deep dark secret that I have never seen Barry Lyndon, the Kubrick film that a lot of this research ended up going into. In this episode, we are going to dive into the screenplay that Kubrick put together, going through the story meticulously with a couple of scenes recreated for your listening pleasure. We will also hear correspondence from Kubrick to his collaborator, Felix Markham, an historian and Napoleon expert. So, without any further ado, let's get into the film. After all of the research, after all of the obsession, after all of the letters back and forth, on September 29th, 1969, Stanley Kubrick had a draft ready of his magnum opus, Napoleon. Let us take you on an imaginary trip. You sit down in an auditorium. The lights go down. The MGM logo appears on the silver screen. As you begin to witness the story, the screenplay that was Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. So we start in a bedroom in Corsica. We see a well-worn teddy bear is cradled in the arms of Napoleon, age 4, who dreamily sucks his thumb, listening to a bedtime story told by his young mother, Letizia. His 5-year-old brother, Joseph, is already asleep beside him, and we hear a narrator.
Napoleon was born at Ajaccio in Corsica on August 15th, 1769. He had not been a healthy baby, and his mother, Letizia, lavished him with care and devotion. In middle age, he would write about her from St. Helena.
And then we hear Napoleon's voiceover.
My mother has always loved me. She would do anything for me.
We're hit with the title, Napoleon. So, first thing, this movie has 2 narrators.
Oh, is that moving forward? There's 2 narrators.
We have a narrator, and we have Napoleon's narration as well.
Are we talking a little bit of like battling narrate? They're not talking to each other.
No, they're not talking to each other. Now, I'd never seen double narration in a movie.
It's a DN. It's a DN, Cambo.
And this gets brought up a lot in discussion about this, that this film has 2 narrators. Now, Alison Castle, who put together this Napoleon book, when I talked to her, she had an interesting theory about this.
And the script has a lot of things about it that don't seem particularly Kubrickian, and they don't strike me as things that made a lot of sense for him, but they really would have made a lot of sense to the executives. The executives would have loved having Napoleon's voiceover and having a narrator, because that way you really understand what's going on. You get to hear Napoleon's inner thoughts, and then you don't have to worry too much about understanding the story, because the narrator is also going to tell you. if Kubrick really intended to do that, I never saw any indication of it. For me, that's like textbook Kubrick just doing something for the executives, because when he would start shooting a script, he would rewrite the pages every day. Maybe he was undecided which one he would do, because if you look at Clockwork Orange, that was a first-person narrative by Alex, and it was based on a book that was a first-person book. And Barry Lyndon was also based on a book that was written in the first person, but he chose to have that narrated. So he was in between those two on this one, and literally and figuratively, he might have been toying with which one he wanted to do, and he put both in.
So we're here with the main titles, and then we see several scenes of Napoleon growing up, including him being bullied at school, he's getting in fights, and we even see his first sexual experience with a lady of the night.
Oh.
And sex and depravity are going to come up a lot in this story, because this is something that Kubrick clearly dove into quite a bit. We get about 3.5 pages that kind of establish him as this little boy, but he's a genius. You know, he's kind of like clearly wise beyond his ages. And then, a couple of pages of him with this lady of the night. But that whole sequence, the whole first 10 or so pages, start with him as a little kid with his teddy bear, see him in military school, see him getting bullied and start to stand up for himself, see his sexual awakening, or just to establish him as a character. We now cut, there's another title, it says 1789 Revolution. And Napoleon is now a young man somewhere in his mid-20s. And he cuts to a town square, and it's jammed with 300 peasants and town workers. Many of these people are women. And he sees Monsieur Varlac, a revolutionary leader who stands on a cart flanked by a small revolutionary committee. We're deep in the French Revolution here. He is described as a short, muscular, bald man in his 40s, Monsieur Varlac. He's wearing glasses. And behind him, you see 6 severed heads stuck on pikes as Napoleon enters the scene.
Citizens, word has come from France that the foul prison of the Bastille has been captured. Its governor's head is up on a pike. All Paris is now in the hands of its people. Soon, all France will be in the hands of its people. Good day to our brother-in-arms. Have you come to join us?
I am looking for Monsieur George Varlac, who resides in the Rue des Frelicots. Do you know him, monsieur?
Very well, Citizen Lieutenant. You've come to the right place, for I am Citizen Varlac.
Contrary to what you've been telling these good people, Monsieur Varlac, France is still in the hands of its proper authorities, and they have sent me here with a warrant for your arrest. You are charged with the murder of Monseigneur de Buchy and his son, and the burning of his chateau.
Revolution is not a polite discussion in a pub, Citizen Lieutenant. One does not call it murder to kill such people.
You may save your philosophy for the magistrate, Monsieur Varlac. I am only a simple officer in the army, and to me, what you have done is called murder, and has always been called murder by honest men.
And do you propose to arrest us all, Citizen Lieutenant? I was not there alone.
No, Monsieur Varlac. My warrant is only for you. Now, will you please come down at once? You will be taken back to Chalon for trial.
Citizen Lieutenant, my advice to you is to leave this town at once with your men. We do not wish to harm our brothers in uniform.
Monsieur Varlac, do not pretend to speak for these good people, whom you have misled and inflamed with violent speech. Now, I order you to come down from the cart.
I do not recognize the authority of the king, or any of his lackeys. I suggest you leave now with your men, while you can.
Monsieur Varlac, I will count slowly to 5, and if you have not begun to get down from the cart by then, I will carry out your execution on the spot. 1, 2,
3, 4. This is your last chance, Monsieur Varlac. 5. A confessed murderer has just been shot. Now, let all honest men return to their homes.
Yeah, so this paints a picture of two things. One, Napoleon is a very dedicated soldier.
Yep.
Taking care of business. And France is in turmoil.
Yes, France is in turmoil.
And people are turning against each other.
Jack Nicholson does a flawless French accent.
I love Jack Nicholson saying French words.
I know. Monsieur.
And burning,
Yeah.
and burning his chateau. And believe me, there's plenty of that coming up. I love it. I love it so much.
Good.
So now we see several short scenes, including a mob of thousands of people that have broken in and forced Louis and Marie Antoinette and their children out onto the balcony.
This is Let Them Eat Cake, Canberra.
Wow, she's let them eat too much cake and they've done a revolution on her. Because I don't know if you know how this ends, but it's not good for Marie Antoinette. Derisive cheers come from the multitudes in the courtyard. They're now ousting Marie Antoinette from the palace. Over the next several scenes, we see Napoleon start to make his way up the ranks in the military. And we also meet an important leader called Paul Barras. And he's the citizen deputy of the Committee of Public Safety. He's been sent to Paris to personally report on the failures of different sieges that are happening. And Barras seems to take to Napoleon quite quickly and is impressed with Napoleon's drive and his cunning. We learn from the narrator.
In July of 1794, the death of Robespierre ended the reign of terror and sent Paris headlong into a lavish whirl of pleasure and sensuality, as if it were necessary to shake off the nightmare and make up for lost time.
They're Moulin Rouging it.
Big time.
Big
yeah.
time.
We actually see Napoleon kind of go to this lavish party where there's all kinds of weird sex performances going on, a little bit Eyes Wide Shut in that regard. But this is also where he first sees Josephine. Has a very small interaction with her, but not too much. But he kind of lays eyes on Josephine for the first time and is immediately taken. At the same time, a new political crisis is brewing in Paris, and the moderate government, which has come to power with the fall of the old guard, soon shows itself to be inept and corrupt and unpopular. And it's now faced with a serious challenge from the royalists. This is dense, isn't it?
This is crazy.
Yeah. But, importantly, this means we cut to Barras, who's in one of his big, lavish military offices, and the script notes that this scene is lit by candles. Just candles only. Yeah. We see Barras is in a terrible state, ashen from fear and lack of sleep, when young Napoleon enters the room.
Oh, my dear friend. Come in, please. Sit down.
I'm sorry. I was at the theater and I didn't receive your note until I returned to my hotel.
Thank you for coming. Would you care for a drink?
No, thank you.
I don't have to tell you of our latest difficulties.
Things are quite serious, I should say.
We expect an attack on the convention tomorrow morning at daybreak, and I have been placed in charge of its defense.
What do you have in mind?
To be perfectly honest, I haven't the vaguest idea.
Are you serious?
I don't even know whether a defense is possible.
What forces do you have at your disposal?
About 5,000 troops.
Cavalry?
The 21st Dragoons. About 200 or 300 troopers.
Any cannon?
There are none here.
Where are they?
Well, I believe there are at least guns in Sablon.
You could have them here by daybreak.
Is this enough to oppose 40,000 men?
Properly arranged, yes.
These are odds of 8 to 1.
The numbers are not particularly relevant. You are not up against soldiers. This is a mob, and they will run as soon as things become sufficiently unpleasant.
Would you be prepared to handle this for me?
Are you proposing to transfer command to me?
In every practical sense, yes. But officially, of course, I would have to retain command.
Fair enough.
I must be honest with you. I first approached 3 generals more senior than yourself, and they all, very prudently, sent excuses.
I'm not insulted.
You realize what is at stake.
Our lives. The revolution. My career.
Oh, there we go. That's a tactical mind right there, Cambo.
It is. I think that it's such a great scene in that it very clearly demonstrates that Napoleon has a very tactical mind and he doesn't panic. And it's with this that he is actually made the commander of the armies of Italy through this little deal. And he prepares for his Italian campaign. He's working in his office one day when he's approached by a young man. And it seems the army has been collecting all the weapons in the town for use in the battles that are coming up. And that they've recently confiscated a sword that belonged to his deceased father. During their conversation, Napoleon discovers that this is actually the son of Josephine, the woman that he saw at the party. So we now cut to Napoleon arriving at Josephine's house, and he's carrying something wrapped in paper under his arm.
Mama, this is General Bonaparte.
Madame de Beauharnais.
Ah, how nice to meet you, General Bonaparte. One has read so much about you lately. Please, sit down.
Thank you, Madame de Beauharnais. You probably don't recall, but we met briefly a few months ago at a party at Paul's house.
Oh, yes, of course. Have you met my daughter, Hortense?
Yes, we introduced ourselves at the door.
May I offer you a drink?
Oh, I don't want to put you to any inconvenience.
Oh, it's not the slightest inconvenience, General Bonaparte. It is an honor to have you here.
You are very kind. Do you have some sherry, perhaps?
Yes, of course. Hortense, darling, will you tell Louise to bring some sherry?
Will you excuse me, General Bonaparte?
Yes, of course. I hope you will forgive me for barging in on you like this. I called to bring this to your son, but I understand from your charming daughter that he is out for the afternoon.
Yes, I'm afraid he is. I believe he's riding. I know he'll be heartbroken to have missed you.
Well, I'm sure that you will be just as pleased to have this as he will be.
General Bonaparte, my curiosity is unbearable. May I ask what you have in that mysterious package?
Your late husband's sword, madam. Returned with my compliments.
Oh, how very nice of you to bring that for Eugene. Did General de Boissin give it to you?
No, I'm afraid I never had the pleasure of meeting the general. This sword was taken several days ago from your son by some of my soldiers.
Oh, you must forgive me, General Bonaparte. I'm afraid you will think me incredibly stupid, but I know absolutely nothing about this. Eugene is so independent, he hardly tells me anything anymore. And he has so many things in his room. I must confess I wasn't even aware that he had this sword. You know how boys can be.
Well, we hear a bit of old charming Napoleon there, who is schmoozing up to Josephine. There is an immediate connection between these two. And it very quickly, immediately shows them in a relationship. One of the next scenes is they kind of immediately start making love in the next scene. Not in the lounge room, but it cuts to them in a relationship now. They're making love. And this is how it's described in the script. A candlelit oval bedroom that is completely encircled with floor-to-ceiling mirrored panels. And this scene also lit entirely by candlelight.
Mate, this is going crazy. This is crazy.
The crux of this story is obviously about their love story, so this happens quite quickly. They also marry. And Napoleon, after marriage, he goes off to prepare for his Italian campaign. So while at one of his camps for the Italian campaign, he writes a number of love letters to Josephine, which we hear in his voiceover.
My dearest Josephine, I awaken full of you. Between your portrait and the memory of our intoxicating night, my senses have had no respite. Sweet and incomparable Josephine, what is this bizarre effect you have upon my heart?
At this stage in his life, Napoleon is on the brink of worldwide fame. He's climbing the ranks as a very respected military general. And he's already proving himself to be a great symbol of strength. And yet, as he writes these letters, we see a completely different side of a man who just shot Monsieur Varlac in the town square. We see a really emotionally vulnerable Napoleon Bonaparte in these letters. He is fawning over Josephine. And while we hear Napoleon pour his heart out, this is contrasted with us watching Josephine have an affair with Captain Hippolyte Charles.
Okay, so this is like over that. So you get, I like that, Cambo.
Yes.
I like that.
And it's immediately showing that he is obsessed with her, but she is not so obsessed with him. As we move through this sequence, we slowly hear a shift in the tone of Napoleon's words. His heart, which was so much in love at the beginning of the sequence, starts to become troubled, aching, and wounded.
No letters from you. Only once every 4 days do I receive one. Whereas if you loved me, you would write me twice a day. Your letters are as cold as friendship. What is left for you to do to make me more wretched? Stop loving me? That's already done.
We now cut to a huge battle sequence between the French and the Austrians. This is one of the battles that I'm sure Kubrick would have meticulously recreated. With these armies of men and paper costumes and
stuff. Yeah.
But funnily enough, even though you can see in all of the planning and the documentation that he had huge plans for all this stuff, the script pages are really short. This battle's not even 2 pages long in the script. Because I assumed that what are you really going to write?
It's all.
It just kind of explains the dot points of the battle. But yes, I'm sure this would have been a huge spectacle, Kubrickian style. Napoleon and Josephine are now back together, making love in a Milan palace that they've just taken over during their Italian campaign. And we now hear voiceover number 3.
No, there's not a third voiceover.
Well, we hear Josephine, she's writing a letter, and we hear the letter in voiceover as we watch them make love in this palace.
My dear Therese, the journey here to Milan was the most difficult and uncomfortable imaginable. I am bored to death. My husband doesn't love me, he worships me. I fear he will go mad with love. Worse than that, I fear for my poor Hippolyte. We may have been indiscreet on this journey, and I think Joseph and Junot suspect something.
So, Joseph, I don't know if you remember from the very first scene, is his brother. And Junet is a general. And the rumors start swirling that Napoleon's wife is running around and his lunch is very much being cut by
a cockhold.
Hippolyte Charles. In the next scene, we have Napoleon in one of his lavish palaces planning for the next battle with Junet and Joseph when Captain Hippolyte Charles enters the scene.
Come in, Captain Charles.
Hello, sir.
I believe you are acquainted with my brother, Joseph Bonaparte.
Hello.
And my aide, Major Juno.
Yes, sir. I had the honor of meeting them on a trip from Paris.
Captain Charles, I believe you are one of General Leclerc's aides de camp?
Yes, sir, I am.
Was it he who assigned you to command the escort which accompanied Madame Bonaparte's coach?
Yes, sir.
Was the trip normal in every aspect?
Yes, sir.
Did any difficulties of any kind arise during the trip?
No, sir. Not at all.
Then you have my thanks, Captain Charles, for safely escorting Madame Bonaparte to Milan, and you may consider your assignment completed.
Thank you, sir.
You will return to Paris tomorrow, and you will carry my compliments and thanks to General Leclerc for assigning such an excellent officer to carry out a responsibility which has meant so much to myself and to Madame Bonaparte.
Yes, sir. I will do that.
You may go, Captain Charles.
Thank you, sir.
I would like both of you to read this. Please read it aloud.
To Citizen General Bonaparte, from one who does not wish to see him dishonored by his wife. You should know, Citizen General, that your wife has taken a lover, one Captain Hippolyte Charles, undated and unsigned.
Naturally, one does not take much stock in such a piece of filth, but on the other hand, it is not the sort of thing one can simply ignore. What do you think, Joseph?
No.
Juno?
No. One cannot simply ignore it.
I am afraid, then, I have to ask you both, Joseph as my brother and Juno as my good friend, whether or not you know anything about this, or whether you saw anything at all during the trip which might make you suspect some truth to it.
No, nothing at all.
Not even the slightest hint of something?
No. Captain Charles commanded the cavalry escort and rode outside the carriage. In the evenings, he always ate at another table. They hardly ever spoke to each other.
You would tell me, Joseph, wouldn't you?
Yes, of course I would. You know I'm not one of your wife's greatest admirers, but I certainly know nothing about this.
And you, Juno?
No, I don't know anything about it either. Not a thing.
Well, thank you both. As I said, I shall regard this as a piece of malevolence from someone who does not wish well to myself or Josephine. Naturally, I shall trust your discretion to say nothing about this.
During the writing of this screenplay, Kubrick was constantly checking that things were historically accurate by writing to his collaborator, Felix Markham. Here's one letter he sent Felix, making sure that the scene you've just heard was, if not accurate, at least plausible.
Dear Felix, some writers say that Napoleon learnt about Hippolyte Charles after returning from the first Italian campaign. Josephine's maid, Louise Compois, who had an affair with Juno, is said to have told him. On the other hand, other historians say that he first learnt the news from Juno in time in Egypt. If this information is uncertain, it would suit my purposes better if he learnt it for the first time in Egypt. What is your view on this?
So the reason I have picked the scenes that I've picked is I think that there are two things that are apparent. One, Kubrick loves this stuff. It's so specific in all of the dialogue and everything like that. He clearly loves this stuff. And two, I think this story is equally, about Napoleon's rise to power and his military genius and all that kind of stuff. But it is what Kubrick does best, and it's a man obsessed.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I thought you were going to say it's like Bridget Jones's Diary. This love
And
triangle.
it's a little bit like Bridget Jones's Diary. There is diary entries. There is a love triangle.
Yeah.
No, I think you can imagine You know, they describe the Kubrick stare.
Mm.
Are you aware of this trope? The looking down the barrel of the camera, dead-eyed. You can imagine so many Kubrick stares in this as he is hearing about his wife's affairs.
You can see it going into his, like him trying to process it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we now see from pages 43 to 52, so almost 10 pages worth, we get given Napoleon's famous tour through Egypt. It's described as a romantic dream of conquest. And he's following the footsteps of Alexander's march into India. But most importantly is he has huge success on all of these campaigns. And when he returns to Paris, we see yet another huge cinematic shot full of crowds and flags, and Napoleon is now in an open carriage waving to everyone. He's come back as an absolute conqueror and a king. But his relationship with Josephine is still on the rocks, because in amongst all of this, we cut to them and there are talks of getting divorced. He wants nothing to do with her. He's sick of her. He's sick of how she's betrayed him. And we see now that we're actually at a coronation in Notre Dame for Napoleon. He's being crowned. He's now risen to the very top of France in a power vacuum. The Pope reaches for the crown, and Napoleon stops him and takes the crown himself and puts it onto his own head in front of everyone.
That's a good scene.
Napoleon looks with an air of pride and satisfaction at Josephine as she advances towards him down the altar. So he's power playing her. He's like, come to me. You need to come to me. And she kneels down in front of him as the king. And we see a little tear fall into her clasped hands as she looks up to Napoleon, who has now just been crowned king. And the narrator tells us,
on December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon was made Emperor of France. He would later say, I found the crown lying in the gutter, and I picked it up.
Midway-ish through the movie now, and he has now ascended all the way through the ranks to become the emperor.
He's the emperor, mate.
But his personal life is a mess, and he doesn't know what's going on with Josephine, and he wants to divorce her. They're not divorced yet, but he says, I'll have no more of you. So we now start to get a couple of scenes showing his kind of lust for power. We see a dining room, and Napoleon and Josephine sit at ends of a long table hosting beautiful women and various important guests. Napoleon puts down the leader of a revolution who has failed to overthrow a government. He's starting to really talk down to a lot of the people around him. And he gives a speech that illustrates his most conservative philosophies and about the nature of man and how man never really changes, and you take power and you grasp power. He's going full Napoleon. He then proceeds to walk up to one of the beautiful women at the table, Madame Trudeau, and he spills wine on her dress. Apologetic, he offers to take her to the other room and get some water for the stain, and they leave together.
That's what this is. Has he been watching like How to Date Women sort of thing? Like this is like the original Neg. It's like you spill something.
He's been reading the game. Yeah,
he's been reading the game. Spill something in their dress, and then like, now you have to come home with me.
I tell you what, it must have worked, and there are candles ready to be blown out because we cut to a locked room near his office. Boom. And Napoleon and Madame Chillard kiss passionately and strip out of their clothes. Well, this is interrupted by Josephine desperately knocking on the door, and she begs Napoleon to return to the party. People will know, people will see. He tells her to give him 5 minutes. We then cut to later that night, and Josephine and Napoleon are fighting about what just happened.
How dare you do that to me tonight? How dare you? Do you realize who Madame Trillard's husband is? Suppose he found out. Oh, shut up, will you? Your tears have absolutely no effect on me. What a fool I have been. I am not a man like any other man. I must be free to do what I please. I must be free of this sordid jealousy. Very well, then. I will not put a specific time limit on this, but you must accept the idea that we will have to be divorced. And soon. And from now on, We will sleep in separate bedrooms.
Separate bedrooms?
Yes.
But you will not be safe.
Not be safe? What on earth are you talking about?
In case of a surprise attack at night. I'm such a light sleeper. I could wake you. I could scream.
Who is it?
It's me.
Oh.
Sit down. I didn't mean the things that I said. I was angry, and I said more than I meant to.
Oh, my darling. I'm sorry too. I won't do that again. Whatever you do, I won't cause you any more embarrassment. I promise. Oh, I didn't tell you. I've seen Dr. Corvisa, and he was very reassuring and encouraging. He has excellent results with the waters of Plombières, and he thinks it would be a good idea for me to spend a few weeks there. Apparently, he sent Madame Lefroc there last year, and she gave birth to twins.
Indeed. Well, you may tell Dr. Corvisart I should be entirely satisfied with half her success.
So things aren't well in the Napoleon household.
No, things are not rosy there, Cambo.
Yes, and he's been quite awful to this woman. To be fair, she was quite awful to him. So it's two awful people being awful. But yes, this is a story obsessed with their relationship and the breakdown of their relationship and his blindness to things like this. We see the war with England continues with a naval battle in the English Channel, which is decidedly lost. But to represent this, we see what's described as an eerie shot of two French ships lying on the sea's bottom. But we now know this was actually designed as a way to represent the battle without having to film the expensive battle.
Oh, good. I like that.
Yeah, clever. It's clever. We also encounter quite a long sequence. This runs from page 81 to 88, showcasing Napoleon's new friendship with Tsar Alexander I. This is the only real friendship Napoleon would experience in this screenplay. They become quite close, and it's a sequence of them set to like an extended montage of music of them visiting ornate palaces and all this kind of stuff.
With getting to know you, getting to know playing in the background.
There is a lot of political back and forth in this section. It's very dry.
It's very dry. Okay.
I've essentially summed it up there.
Keep it light. Yeah, keep it light.
But in the screenplay, it's nearly 10 pages of this.
Okay.
Yeah. Here's another letter that Stanley sent to Felix, double-checking a few facts.
Dear Felix, how would a king address a lesser noble in conversation? In Shakespeare, it is Richmond, Gloucester, etc. But what if, for example, the king was addressing Ney, the Prince of Moscova? Would he call him Prince? Moscova? Ney? Presumably, the full title in the third person for sarcasm, threats, and very, very formal occasions. Regards, Stanley.
The story continues when we get back to Paris in the throne room. We're made witness to the disillusion of Napoleon and Josephine's marriage. Napoleon says a few words. Josephine is an emotional wreck. She holds out a piece of paper. Uncontrollable sobs choke her voice as she reads the statement. With the permission of my august and dear husband, I must declare that, retaining no hope of having children, and may satisfy the requirement of his policy in the interest of France, I have the pleasure of giving him the greatest proof of attachment and devotedness that was ever given on earth. She sobs and she can't continue. The Bonaparte family watches on, coldly. The brother and the mum, they're all watching this poor woman Sub her heart, because Napoleon is leaving her because she can't give him an heir. They're unmoved by Josephine's emotions. She's sent to live in Malmaison. She's in a deep state of depression. We become witness to a proxy wedding of Napoleon and Marie Louis, the Duchess of Parma, and the niece of Marie Antoinette. So he's immediately moved on.
Bang.
And then on the same balconies that we saw Marie Antoinette and Louis face the angry mob, Napoleon stands before a crowd of civilians with Marie Louis and holds up his new son, the infant king of Rome, he declares.
Like Lion King style, just holds it out.
Yeah. And they all bow their heads.
Yeah.
Now, despite the pleading of French diplomats, Tsar Alexander completely reneges on the treaty that he had come up with Napoleon before when they were being mates.
Oh, he reneges.
They were a friendship, but it was like a bond between countries that they had established. And he reneges on this deal, who we see in the next scene cheerfully asking Barber, I would like to have all of the books that are Berthsworth consulting on the typography of Russia. So essentially, Napoleon's like, oh, if he's going to renege,
well, I'm gonna
show me what Russia's got for me.
Wow, okay. I'm going to get my tactics brain going.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He enters Austria first and visits the royal family. The last time he would ever do so as the emperor. And this is also one of the last occurrences in which Stanley uses the clever technique of showing us things by making us hear words that undercut what we're seeing. So we see Napoleon embrace warmly the Emperor of Austria and his wife and the King Frederick Wilhelm, and we hear the narrator tell us
Napoleon's invasion plans were foiled by England's correct naval strategy and by their alliances with Austria and Russia.
So everyone Napoleon thinks is his close friend, they're all working with his new enemy.
They're not, mate.
Napoleon continues leading his army into Moscow. But a funny thing, he finds it deserted. The entire city completely deserted.
Is that to save money on the budget?
No, this really happened. This actually happened. When Napoleon got to Moscow, the whole city was abandoned. This is how it's described in the screenplay. Not a chimney sends up smoke. Not a man appears in the battlements or at the gates. All is silence. Alexander is, as it seems, ready to surrender his city. But another man steps in, the mayor of Moscow. He has different ideas. Early one morning, we see Napoleon sleeping in the palace in Moscow now. He's taken over the city. He walked in to an abandoned city and was like, great. He's sleeping inside the Kremlin. And someone enters his room to wake him because they're seeing some strange lights out of the bedroom window.
Sir, please wake up.
What do you want?
Napoleon immediately becomes aware of a strange light in the room. He leaps out of bed and rushes to the window. The entire city is in flames.
What time is it?
4 o'clock.
My God. What a fire. When did it start?
The first reports came in at about 10.
Why didn't you wake me then?
At first, it hardly seemed more than a routine fire.
How did it spread so quickly?
It is the work of incendiaries.
I told Mortier that he would answer with his life for any looting.
Our troops have no part in this. It has been started by the Russians.
Impossible. I don't believe it.
We have already captured a dozen incendiaries, convicts. Released just 2 days ago, they said they were acting under orders of the secret police.
But to start a fire like this in 5 hours? How is it possible? It would take a carefully organized plan, tons of combustibles, and hundreds of people.
From what we can tell, there are hundreds of agents all over the city. The combustibles seem to have been carefully placed beforehand, and all the fire engines have been removed from the city.
My God. This could be very bad for us. Very bad indeed.
This could be very bad. Very bad.
Very bad. It has slight Arrested Development.
It feels like I've made a huge mistake.
But this is true. The Russians evacuated Moscow, but it was a huge trap. Once Napoleon got to Moscow and took over,
burnt it down.
They just burnt it down. They just set it alight. I am fascinated how they would have filmed this.
Yeah.
I haven't seen too much in the documentation about this particular scene, but I guess maybe miniatures or something. You need to show an entire city on fire before CGI.
Yeah, but why did he need to know the time straight away? He was like, "What's the time?" And they're like, 4:00. He goes, "Okay."
Clearly, Kubrick had a cue card.
Yeah,
that said,
at
what time was he
4:00?
notified? Yeah, he's notified at 4:00.
Right.
Okay,
That is 100%
that detail's
right.
going in. But of course, yes, the incendiaries, under the orders of the Russian secret police, run through the streets and they set fires to buildings. We do see a few skirmishes between looting French soldiers and the Russian secret police. A few short action scenes. The Russian general plants the idea in the ear of Alexander, lead Napoleon on to believe that they will sign a peace treaty until winter comes and then hide. Napoleon will be forced to retreat with nothing. So he's saying, string them along until winter, because Russian winters, they're going to defeat.
Yeah, as the Germans figure out later on as well. You don't go into Russia in winter.
And as Napoleon also figures out, because eventually they have to withdraw from Moscow because of the Russian winter. They are almost completely wiped out and devastated by this winter weather. The narrator tells us that
by November 5th, the temperature was down to 30 degrees of frost, and French horses were dead. They were not bred to endure such cold, and not being properly shod for ice, had no chance to survive in these conditions.
we follow this with several scenes of desperate soldiers eating bad food and rotted food, having to kill their horses, and the numbers thin and thin over the harsh landscapes as they try and retreat out of Russia. So they got absolutely pantsed by Russia.
Yeah.
And this begins. Obviously, Napoleon had a very famous downfall. This is beginning his downfall. Following their return to Paris, we learn that France has been invaded by all of the combined forces of England, Russia, Prussia, and Austria all at once. Have all come in. We see Napoleon in his office burning private papers and playing with his 3-year-old son. Outside, he kisses Marie-Louise and the son for the last time. They leave in a carriage with an escort in tow. He will never see them again. In a blow after blow, despite his brilliant strategies, he would lose Paris. A treaty would be signed without his knowledge or approval, and Napoleon would lose everything. France had no faith in him anymore.
Napoleon, in return for his abdication from the throne of France, was given a token sovereignty of the tiny island of Elba with the title of Emperor, a yearly income of 2 million francs, an army of 700, and a navy of 3 ships.
That's actually a pretty good deal.
It's a pretty good deal.
That's a retirement plan.
I'd be satisfied with that.
If someone gave me an army and a couple of ships to retire, I think that's all right. And what did he get? 2 million a year? That's huge.
2 million francs in those days as well.
It's a lot of francs.
So, in a scene that's designed to be a giant contrast to Napoleon's glory days, when he was given grand and triumphant receptions in Italy and France with enthusiastic crowds and banners and flags, here we witness Napoleon's humiliation. Stanley describes it as a comic opera parody of former grandeur. Napoleon marches in a pathetic procession with a few of the city's officials down the main streets of Elba, the island that he's been deserted to. We're treated to a scene involving Josephine and Tsar Alex I. They have become romantically involved.
Dog.
Alexander promises to keep her financially secure for the rest of her life. Unfortunately, we learn that would be short-lived, as the narrator tells us that Josephine would die 2 weeks later with pneumonia. We're back in Elba now. This is Napoleon's lowest point now. Napoleon is devastated by the news of Josephine's death. Nobody cared to write him or tell him. He had to read about it in the papers. And now, with his son so very far away, he cries that he's lost everything that is precious to him. Politically, the circumstances, he thinks, are actually ripe for his comeback. The army and the people of France were ready to rise up against Louis, a king marked by clumsiness and a disdain who proved that the Bourdain dynasty had learned nothing and forgotten everything. We had a plan.
Napoleon set sail from Elba on February 26, 1815, with his small force of 700 soldiers, while the governor of the island, Sir Neil Campbell, was away in Florence. He put his soldiers to work writing out his proclamations in longhand.
General Cannet presents his compliments to the Emperor and requests that he lay down his arms and surrender himself and his men.
Thank you, Colonel. Please present my compliments to General Cannet, and tell him that I shall come presently and bring the answer myself.
Bonaparte is on his way to attempt to illegally re-establish himself over the legitimate government of our King, Louis XIV. It is our responsibility as loyal soldiers of France to prevent him from doing this by whatever means are necessary. His force numbers less than 700 men.
What about us? Don't we count?
Hello, men of the Fifth. Men of the Fifth, do you recognize your emperor?
Yes!
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 I recognize you. We are old friends. I know you from Friedland and Borodino. And you there, Sergeant Monestier. How are you? My good friends, I am told that Marshal Ney has promised the king to bring me back to Paris in an iron cage. I have sent word to my old friend, Marshal Ney, that he can make that a wooden box, if he is able to manage it. But I certainly must refuse an iron cage. I'm not as young as I used to be, and I can't accept such drafty accommodations. Men of the Fifth, your general has invited me to surrender myself and my men, but I come to make you an offer. Men of the Fifth, will you join me? I shall have to send a message to Louis XV in Paris and tell him not to send any more troops. I have enough already.
Good bit of pomp and ceremony there, Campbell.
Yep. And this is the thing that really happened. Napoleon charmed his way back into and apparently he did recognize individual men in the crowd.
That's a good way to do it.
And was like, I remember you, right? Yeah. And
they say CEOs. It's a good thing when you're CEO, you remember like employees' names and stuff like that.
Yeah. We'll remember that when we're on top.
We'll never come down, Cambo.
Back, he essentially takes over the armies of France again. Yes. This is the last great hurrah of Napoleon. He's lost everything at this point. In a great transition, a stark contrast from the previous victorious scenes, Napoleon's back in the dining room, sitting at a large table, but this time he eats alone.
The Allies had quickly patched up the differences that had divided them for almost a year at the Congress of Vienna. To make matters worse, they refused to have any diplomatic dealings with Napoleon, declaring him a criminal beyond the protection of the law.
With an animated map and about 6 pages of battle scenes now, because of course all of this is, the Battle of Waterloo, and all of the big armies come, and Wellington, and all they start attacking. We get 6 pages of battle scenes, so you can imagine that these scenes were the ones that are going to be huge. We see the world's armies led by Blucher and Wellington. They mobilize and they descend upon France and Napoleon. We're given a scene after illuminating how close Napoleon has come to winning certain battles, but lost due to calculated tactical errors, which of course, in the Battle of Waterloo, he was famous for not seeing very small details that cost him entire battles. During this, Napoleon would also become painfully ill. He would rest the decisions of the war on the shoulders of Marshal Ney, whose incompetence would prove to be his undoing. And we would witness the decimation of the French army. When the returning monarchy reacquires the French throne, Ney would be shot for treason for joining Napoleon.
Napoleon escaped from France, where he might have met the same fate, and surrendered to the English, hoping for a congenial exile in Britain. But he was sent as a prisoner to the tiny island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, 1,000 miles from the nearest land. He would live out the last 5 years of his life there, amid the petty squabbles of his own entourage and his captors. His house was a hastily rebuilt collection of buildings originally constructed as cattle sheds. His 4 constricted rooms were infested with rats. His food and wine and opened mail were subjects of continuous dispute. His walks were so closely guarded that he eventually gave them up altogether. His jailer, Sir Hudson Lowe, was a weak, narrow-minded and petty man, obsessed with the fear his prisoner would escape, though a squadron of 10 ships and a garrison of 3,000 men guarded the island. His final illness would, until the very end, be dismissed by English doctors as a diplomatic disease.
Who is there?
Bertrand, sire.
I have just had the most vivid dream about Josephine.
Yes, sire?
She was sitting there, and it was as if I had last seen her only the night before. She hadn't changed. She was still the same. Still completely devoted to me. And she told me we were going to see each other again. And never again leave each other. She has promised me. Did you see her?
No, sire. I was asleep.
I wanted to kiss her. But she didn't want to kiss me. She slipped away. The moment I wanted to take her in my arms.
Napoleon died on May 5th, 1821.
From ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Hudson Lowe insisted the inscription on the tomb should read Napoleon Bonaparte. Montholon and Bertrand refused anything but the imperial title, Napoleon. In the end, it was left nameless.
Letizia, Napoleon's mother, is dressed in black, sitting alone. The camera moves slowly away from her into an open portmanteau. It's filled with very old children's things. Faded toys, torn picture books, wooden soldiers, and the teddy bear Napoleon slept with as a child. That is the entire screenplay of Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. Can I tell you, I love that ending.
It's good ending.
I don't know why, but it's so sad to see that like his last thought is seeing Josephine one last time and she loved him.
Yeah. And, mate, the teddy bear, bringing the teddy bear back.
Yep.
Bringing
It starts with an image of his teddy bear as a child and ends with an image of his teddy bear abandoned in a room with all the old junk from his mother. So that was Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. I think this is a different film than people think it's going to be.
How so, Cambo?
I think it's a lot smaller and more intimate. I think people are imagining huge scope, huge spectacle. And like there are scenes like the Battle of Waterloo and the Italian campaign. Certainly I think would have had those. But I don't think this is the huge action spectacle that I think some people paint it as.
Yeah, I think it's more of a love story.
It is, and it's
more
super
an emotional love story.
It's super Kubrick. But if Kubrick was so obsessed with this, so absolute that it must be just so, and was the golden child of Hollywood and the golden child of MGM Studios, then why didn't this movie happen? Thank you so much for listening to part 2 of our cancelled movie report on Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. We hope that you enjoyed hearing what Kubrick had in mind for his screenplay. Parts of the story outline for this report were taken from the Mystery Man on Film blog about this project, and you'll find that linked in the episode notes. Thank you so much to our amazing voice cast, which included Ryan Lee, Ashana Sheth, Bill Sunderland, Peter Broughton, Paul Kaczynski, and a few lines from myself. And Michael Hahn was the voice of Stanley Kubrick. And thank you one more time to my co-host, Eden Porter.
Thank you very much for having me, Cambo.
My name is Michael Campbell, and I have hosted and edited this episode. And this show is completely funded by the amazing people that support us over on Patreon. Next week, we are going to dive into the strange story of the cancellation of this film.
And MGM then didn't want to proceed, and the film wasn't green-lighted.
Why studio politics may have caused the death of this project.
Then the question, of course, arose, well, why didn't Stanley just do it? It's public domain, for Christ's sakes. It's Napoleon.
And why I ended up talking to someone about a salt mine in Hutchinson, Kansas.
A treasure trove of writers you've heard of and movies you may have at one point heard were in the works but never quite got made. A lot of those drafts were down there.
But until then, take care.